Good evening, Council, members of the public. Deputy Cabral joining us remotely this evening. May I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? Councillors Garwood and Fisher, that the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of March 8th, 2023 come to order at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? And that is carried. Council, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? And seeing none, may I have a mover and seconder to call this public meeting to order? Councillors Thompson and Deputy Cabral, that the public meeting of council held under section 17 of the Planning Act RSO 1990 P13 be as amended on a new official plan for the Township of Springwater be called to order at 6:31 p.m. All those in favor? And that is carried. Welcome to this public meeting of the Springwater Township Council held in compliance with section 17 of the Planning Act to give the public an opportunity to express their views in regards to the new proposed Township of Springwater official plan. The first part of the meeting is to present the new official plan. Following, the public will be given an opportunity to make oral submissions in person or through Zoom application. Any person wishing to speak, an oral submission will have been added to the commenters list. If a person or public body who files an appeal of a decision of the Township of Springwater in respect to the new official plan does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or written submissions to the Township before the proposed new official plan is passed, the Ontario Land Tribunal may dismiss all or part of the appeal. All comments and questions should be addressed through the chair. Oral submissions will be included in the meeting's minutes and form part of the public record, including the name, address of the speaker, as information collected under the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act. The minutes will be at the meeting posted on the Township's website. I will now call upon the clerk to confirm notice of this public meeting and dates to which notice has been given.
Notice of this public meeting was published in the Springwater News, being a local newspaper, on the 16th day of February 2023, and via email and or regular mail on the 16th day of February 2023 to all requesting persons and public bodies as prescribed under the Planning Act and its regulations. Notice was also posted on the Township's website and shared on the Township's social media outlets.
Has the Planning Department received any correspondence in response to the notice of public meeting?
There have been items of correspondence received for this application, and they will be addressed through a subsequent recommendation report brought forward to council prior to adoption.
Thank you. I will now call upon Greg Bender and Matt Alexander from WSP to give a presentation outlining the new official plan.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Mayor Coughlin and members of council and members of the public and staff. Very pleased to be here with you this evening. For those of you who are new to the discussion about the official plan, I'm Greg Bender. I'm with WSP, who was retained by the township to work collaboratively with staff and council to prepare a brand new official plan. I also have Matt Alexander here, who is a practice lead with WSP and will be delivering the lion's share of the presentation, but I'll provide you with some opening remarks in terms of where we are in the process, as well as what we're here tonight to talk about, how the official plan has changed from the first draft that was released in the fall of 2022, and sort of the next steps. Next slide, please. You can advance the next slide, please. Thanks. So in terms of the project overview, this was done through two different phases. Phase one was really sort of the background work. Involved preparing a strategy on how we were going to engage and communicate the various elements of the project throughout the two phases. We talked about and engaged in through visioning workshops to really understand from participants and council how they see the township evolving over the next 20-25 years. We prepared a growth management strategy, which really outlined projections that were identified in the county's official plan and looked at identifying the various sort of requirements for land needs to accommodate projected growth to 25 years. We prepared a discussion paper, which really talked about the various planning policy influences that was to help guide this particular project. And we had an open house to, again, gain feedback on various issues and things that we needed to consider through the project. The formal Planning Act kickoff for this particular project was held in late 2019 through a Section 26 meeting, similar to tonight, which is a meeting under Section 26 of the Planning Act. This meeting, Section 26, was really the formal kickoff under the Planning Act statutory meeting to receive feedback on the various issues or items that we are to address through this particular exercise. And then we finalized both the discussion paper and the growth management strategy shortly thereafter, with the intent of moving into phase 2, which was really drafting the official plan, but also trying to answer some of the questions that we heard through the phase 1 work. So that related to understanding the population-related employment issues and questions to answer. We undertook an intensification strategy, and we also undertook a corridor study to understand sort of the visioning of Bayfield over 20, 30, 40 years. So we prepared the draft official plan, which was originally released, I think, in September of 2022. We received substantial amount of feedback, which we considered into the sort of the draft we're here to discuss with you this evening. We held a statutory public open house and again, gave another opportunity to receive feedback. And then now we're here tonight at the statutory public meeting to again receive any feedback on the draft before you, and then look to consider all that feedback and move it to sort of a recommendation for council adoption shortly thereafter. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overview and work program, again, the consultation timeline is, this has been going on for a number of years. It sort of began in 2016 through public visioning workshops. That open house I mentioned was in November of 2019. The Section 26 meeting was December 5th, 2019. Sort of a year later, we had a special meeting of council to update council on the project, just to, again, provide a refresh. February 23rd, 2021, there was a presentation of those supporting studies that I mentioned, the population employment study, the intensification strategy, as well as the Bayfield corridor study. In September 2021, it was the presentation of the final background documents to council, and then we had the statutory public open house in February of 2023. And now I'll turn it over to Matt to provide you with some context on the new draft.
Thanks a lot, Greg. So for this process, this official plan process, because it's a new document, we needed somewhere to start, and we started with the current official plan. So after some of that visioning work that Greg mentioned, we looked at the existing in effect official plan in detail, but created a new outline for the new official plan to make it work a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more user-friendly. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. The existing policies that remain relevant were retained in the new official plan, but we also needed to include new policies to reflect the 2020 provincial policy statement, the growth plan update, and recent amendments to the Planning Act, which changed different things that the municipality has authority to do. We also wanted to roll in recent official plan amendments related to additional residential units, as well as site-specific exceptions and other amendments that have taken place over time. We also created new land use schedules, which are visually clearer and easier to read and understand than the current land use schedules. So this is the new structure that I mentioned. It's intended to flow a little bit more easily, to go from the general to the specific without, while allowing people to flip through and find the policies that are relevant to them. So it begins with a general introduction and discussion of planning for growth, as well as general policies related to the environment, the economy, agriculture, employment areas, and broad kind of concepts around community building. So we talk about public facilities and institutions, parks, open space, and recreational facilities, where they should be located, what kind of performance metrics there should be in terms of their location and their types of activities that would be permitted there. We also talk about cultural heritage, community design, and infrastructure. And then section 12 is really the meat and potatoes of the official plan. And this talks about each of the land use designations, such as residential, commercial, employment, in much more detail. And that's where you're going to find the most direct and most substantive policies that people are going to be turning to when they want to know what they can do on their property. Section 13 is all about interpretation and implementation. So this is where you find policies related to plans of subdivision or consent or minor variance, the types of process for reviewing and preparing planning applications, which is really the mechanism for achieving all of those general policies that are at the front and the specific land use designations and policies that are in the middle. And then just to make things very simple and sort of one package, we are reproducing each of the secondary plans in section 14. If you've ever had to flip through the current official plan, the Midhurst secondary plan is sort of stuck in the middle of it and throws off some of the numbering and makes things a little bit confusing sometimes when you're looking for a specific policy. So we thought, put it to the end, and that way you always know where to find it. I'm going to talk now about some of the major changes between not only the existing official plan, but also from the previous draft that's been reviewed, and the current draft which we are working on. So all of the population and housing growth forecasts that are mentioned in the official plan have of course been updated to reflect the growth management study. One of the comments, or a couple of the comments that we've received since the draft was circulated, was a question about why this draft official plan talks about planning to the year 2031, when we know that the growth plan now has a horizon of 2051. And the reason for that, as Greg mentioned, this process has been going on for a number of years, is when we began this new official plan and did the growth management work, it was all for conformity with the current County of Simcoe official plan. Simcoe, of course, has undertaken a comprehensive review and has adopted an update, but that's not yet in effect. It has not been approved by the province, and therefore, statutorily, this Springwater official plan still needs to be in conformity with the current, in effect, Simcoe County official plan. So we're still referencing 2031 as the horizon, planning horizon, and population employment target year. We were required to clarify the intensification target. So in the current official plan for Springwater, intensification counts as any development within any of the built up areas, any of the settlement areas. But with the updated growth plan in 2017, I believe, intensification only counts if it's within the provincially delineated built-up areas of Midhurst and Elmvale. So we needed to do some additional calculations and update the target so that 15% of all growth is directed into Elmvale and Midhurst. We've removed a number of policies that we feel and that the township felt were redundant and could be simplified. We also incorporated, as I mentioned, recent official plan amendments like the additional residential units policy, and we've updated terminology for consistency with the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. There are a number of phrases and policies that have been adjusted or refined a little bit over the years since the current official plan came into effect, and so we've gone through and tried to update that as much as we can. And based on input received through those visioning workshops and since the beginning of this process, we've added more provisions to support walking and cycling infrastructure, things that would make Springwater a little bit more attractive for folks to get around on their feet or by their own power, either in wheelchairs or cycling or any other active transportation. So specifically, the population forecasts and targets, we've updated the township's population to grow from 22,020 in 2021 to 26,150 people by 2031. And this represents an increase in the number of residents by over 4,000 people over 10 years, or about 19%, which is quite significant. An intensification target of 15% is proposed to be achieved by 2031, meaning that 15% of that annual growth would be contained within the delineated built-up areas in Midhurst and Elmvale. And the existing, I should say, the existing Midhurst secondary plan already sort of sets the stage for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the secondary plans fit in a little later. An employment lands density target of 20 jobs per hectare is proposed to be achieved by 2031. That is a slight reduction from the current target. And the intent there is really to recognize the existing employment lands and work to support those rather than maybe unnecessarily concentrating jobs in specific areas to the detriment to others. So we feel that this is appropriate and that it sets up the township to accommodate the employment that's going to be required by residents and commuters. So the Bayfield Corridor Study, Greg mentioned this, it was part of the last phase of this project. The Bayfield Corridor in Midhurst is an important, it's an important roadway, an important location for the township. It's important to note that the Midhurst secondary plan is not proposed to be changed through this project. So it's a new official plan, but the secondary plans are not going to be repealed or amended through this process. What we have done is add an overlay policy to the official plan, which identifies a segment of Bayfield Street and directs applicants for new development to show how their proposal would help to implement the vision set out in the Bayfield Corridor Study. And if you'll recall from our previous presentations about the Bayfield Corridor Study, the intent is to make Bayfield Street a destination in the township, to improve road safety, including for pedestrians and cyclists, to provide a mix of residential and commercial land uses, and to support new open spaces, park and green landscaping, to turn this into a focal point for the township and a new main street for the township. So the corridor study will be included as an appendix in the final version of the official plan as kind of guidelines, development guidelines. But the existing policies of the Midhurst secondary plan continue to apply. And our intent with this was really to create more of a roadmap and a guideline for achieving the objectives of the secondary plan as it relates to Midhurst. So it's sort of a little bit more detail. Other key changes and specific policies that we've added. The existing official plan has policies for farm-related commercial and industrial uses, and that's kind of an out-of-date terminology. The way this is talked about now is as agriculture-related uses and on-farm diversified uses. And it's kind of planning jargon, but it's in the PPS, so we want to try to reference that. The new policies establish criteria for agriculture-related uses to be permitted within the agricultural designation. So of course, outside of your settlement areas, you have a lot of agricultural lands, but some of those lands are being used for non-agriculture uses that are still related to agriculture. And we wanted to make sure that those are accounted for in the new policies. New policies for on-farm diversified uses establish a definition for the term and criteria for permitting these as secondary uses on farmland. And these can be things like a brewery or a cidery or something like an antique shop or let's let's say a shop or a processing facility for honey or other products that might be made on the farm. A maximum of 2% of the land may be used, up to 1 hectare, may be used for this secondary use. No permanent event venues are permitted through these new policies on prime agricultural land. This doesn't exclude, or it doesn't prevent farm owners from using their property to host weddings and things like that on a temporary basis or sort of on an ad hoc basis. But there was a desire not to have a number of farm properties become those sort of event venues or concert venues. And the other criteria is that the use must not conflict with or preclude the agricultural use of the property. And that's part of the event venue thing. We really didn't want to set up a policy that would allow for farm properties to be primarily used for non-farm uses. And so that's how these policies were structured. We also needed to add some new policies related to employment land conversions. The provincial policy statement and the growth plan have some new policies related to changing designated employment lands to non-employment uses, and we need to make sure we were in conformity with that. So an application to change a designation from industrial or business park to residential, for example, or even something like a commercial use that's a low employment kind of commercial use, they would need to demonstrate that the conversion is needed, and they would do this through by referencing a land needs assessment that would show that there's a surplus of employment lands. They would have to show that the township's employment forecasts can still be met even with the removal of these employment lands, and demonstrate that there's not going to be any compatibility issues. Of course, employment properties, employment lands are typically next to other employment lands, and so changing them into a more sensitive land use could result in some compatibility issues from noise, vibration, and those other noxious kind of impacts. So through the circulation of the draft official plan or following that, the township received over 50 individual comments throughout the project. And I think the version of this that is in the agenda package said close to 50, but we've since received, I think, about 10 comments in the last week. Each comment has been reviewed and considered by the project team. Comments identifying errors or omissions will be addressed in the second draft or the final draft of the official plan. And we received a number of those, and we really appreciate those kinds of comments. Requests for site-specific designation changes have not been addressed through this project. For the most part, requests to change a designation for a specific property or to add permitted uses onto a specific property, those could be applied for by the landowner at any time through an official plan amendment. And we would encourage landowners to do that if that can be a much more time-effective way of getting change. But also if we were to entertain each of those site-specific requests, it would be quite time-consuming for the project team. And if there's anything that would end up holding up the adoption and approval of this official plan, those folks would be waiting for some time. So we really do encourage anybody who has a site-specific request to simply go through the regular process of applying for an official plan amendment. A number of comments were received that raised concern with the environmental protection Category 1 and Category 2 designations applied to their property. And we wanted to address this in the public meeting because it's something that isn't always well understood and it isn't always well communicated by planners. The natural heritage and environmental protection designations do not, and we just want to emphasize, they do not prevent an existing land use from continuing. So if you have a farm that's operating and you see now that there's a portion of it that's identified as environmental protection, that doesn't prevent you from continuing to farm that property. If you have a home and it's shown as environmental protection, it doesn't prevent you from living in that home and doing everything that you would that's permitted within that residential use. What this mapping is intended to do is act as a trigger if you are applying for a change in land use through the Planning Act, or if you are applying to build something new that requires a Planning Act application. And farmers probably know that not everything that they do or every change that they want to do on their property triggers a Planning Act application. And so this is a very technical distinction to make, but it's something that they shouldn't be very concerned about. But the idea is if you wanted to divide your property or change the land use, if you needed to do a Planning Act application for any improvements, then this mapping acts as a trigger to do some further study and make sure that what you want to do isn't going to have a negative impact on those natural features. And it's really to make sure that those features are protected and that you don't inadvertently end up destroying something. I wanted to cover off some of the changes that we've made specifically as a result of comments that were received. So the Conservation Authority had requested a number of changes to specific terms and items. They also requested some changes to mapping to improve clarity and to reflect the source water protection plan. So we've gone through each of those and we've made those changes to a new draft, which is what would be presented for adoption in a little while. We also received comments requesting additional consideration for seniors housing, which of course is very important as Ontario's population and Springwater's population continues to age. So we've gone through and we've made a number of changes to update policies with a little more emphasis on housing for seniors to ensure that there is some consideration for the location of new seniors housing so that it is supportive of the existing community and so that they are close to the resources and facilities that they need. The school board also requested that schools be identified as public service facilities and be permitted in all land use designations subject to land use compatibility considerations. This was important to them to make sure that there's no extra hoops to jump through when new development comes in, justifying the construction of a new school. So that's something that we recommend doing. So we're making that change in the new draft of the official plan, but with consideration that employment designation should not be a location for schools because of the land use compatibility concerns, as well as those environmental protection designations where there's likely to be impacts and additional costs associated with assessing what those impacts might be. And we've also made a number of corrections to mapping. So there are a few things that weren't quite clear in the mapping when we completed the draft and needed some refinements. And as I said, we've also received a number of comments just this week in the lead up to this public meeting, and each of those is being reviewed and considered. And so we'll just get into next steps, I guess. So based on all of that feedback that we've already received and the comments that we hear tonight, we'll be making some final revisions and preparing a new draft official plan to be reviewed by township staff prior to being submitted to council for adoption and to the county for approval following that. And I believe the timeline for that is intended to be sometime in the next month or two, depending on, I guess, the feedback that we hear. And with that, we have some contact information for folks who might be watching at home and would like to provide some comments. There is, I would say that there's no strict cutoff for when you can submit comments, but from our perspective, we'd appreciate any additional comments that haven't already been submitted to be submitted in the next 2 weeks or so. If you have already submitted comments and you want to make sure that you've been heard, I assure you, you have been heard, and we have reviewed the comments. So there's no need to resubmit if you've already made your case. So with that, I think we can end this part of the presentation. I'm not sure if we're going to questions from council or going to public deputations.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander and Mr. Bender. At this time, we will go to questions from the public that have pre-registered. So I will now call on the clerk to introduce individuals who have registered in person to ask questions or make comments regarding the public meeting.
Thank you. There are 3 members of the public who have pre-registered to make an oral submission in person for this public meeting. The first being Kevin Bouchard of Innovative Planning Solutions. Mr. Bouchard, if you could approach and make your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Coughlin and members of council. My name is Kevin Bouchard. I'm a senior associate with IPS Consulting Inc. I'm a land use planner and have been for in excess of 35 years. This evening, I'm representing the property owner at 225 2841 Ontario Inc. Paul Sadlin, and it's the property is at 742 Bayfield Street North, so it's on Bayfield. There is a sketch that's been put up on the screen, and it gives an indication of the property ownership. It's in the full red area. The dotted red area are the lands that I'm going to be speaking to in my my deputation this evening. So that'll give you a context of the lands that I have an interest in. So currently the lands at 742 Bayfield Street North are approximately 42 hectares in area, 100 acres in area. They have 613 meters frontage along Bayfield Avenue North. In the current official plan, they currently contain residential and agricultural uses. And in the current official plan, they're designated agricultural by the enforced plan. They're also subject to section 24.4.1, which you'll know as the Greenbelt area designation, which restricts non-farm residential development on the property. And because I've shown the Midhurst settlement area and secondary planning area, I'm just going to emphasize that these lands are outside of the Midhurst secondary plan area. So that's the context of the property that I'm representing. The draft official plan also proposes to designate these lands as agricultural, and this designation is primarily intended to support agricultural use on a long-term basis on the property. And again, of course, these lands are not being brought into the Midhurst secondary plan area. So we're making 3 requests for modification to the draft official plan. The first is a removal of the lands from Schedule A-3, which is the land use plan. The second is that the lands be designated future development potential in accordance with Schedule A-8, which is the Midhurst secondary plan area. And the third is that the lands form part of the Bayfield Corridor the Bayfield Corridor Overlay designation. So what we're asking is not for a specific designation like commercial or residential on the lands, but a future development designation that imparts the understanding that these lands really aren't suited well for long-term agricultural use. From our perspective, these lands are transitional, meaning it's a transitional land use between the city of Barrie and Springwater. So what we're asking this plan to do is to recognize that the more appropriate designation for these lands anticipates their longer term use in some transitional land use capacity. So what do I mean by transitional land use capacity? Well, I'm going to go back to the discussion of the Bayfield Corridor Overlay. And the purpose or the intent of the Bayfield Overlord Corridor and with respect to these transitional lands would be to make the Bayfield Corridor a destination. So these lands we'd want to be considered as a destination in Springwater to improve road safety, pedestrian access, connectivity, all goals of the Bayfield Corridor overlay designation. That applies, we think, to this property as well. To provide ultimately for a mix of residential and commercial uses on the property, again, speaking to the destination theme in the official plan, supporting new open spaces, parks, green landscaping in the area. So it's clear that we have a very different vision for these lands than is contemplated in the draft official plan. We don't think that our request is not to ask for that specific designation, but to recognize that the historic agricultural greenbelt designation really isn't appropriate for these lands that perform this transitional role and function between the two communities, between Springwater and the city of Barrie. So this, from our perspective, this plan is the start of a more detailed dialogue about what might be on these lands going forward. So in the interim, though, as part of this process, we're asking that we lift these lands out of an agricultural and greenbelt designation and more appropriately identify them as having a future development role and a transitional role in terms of land use between the city of Barrie and the township Springwater. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to members of council if they have any questions or comments. And I will turn back to Clerk Ainsworth to
Thank you.
call for our next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call upon Catherine and Bill Class. You may approach and pose your questions or comments. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what the official procedure is because I've never been here before.
You're acing it. It's
I'm
perfect.
acing it?
Yeah, you
Good.
pulled the
Thank
mic in and you sat down. That's great.
Okay.
So I just actually will require your name and address before you do begin.
I'm
Thank you.
Catherine Klaas. I'm on 2836 Floss Road 8 West in Elmville.
Wonderful. And you can begin. Thank you.
Okay, this is totally different and I don't know if this should be here or not, but this comes out of my love for reading and I ran into this subject which is called UNDRIP. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of it or knows anything about it. It's the United Nations Declaration. Hold on, I have to look at this, otherwise I forget. On the rights of Indigenous people. And apparently it is having or going to have an impact on land use potentially. I don't know, has anybody heard of it? Apparently it has been going on for years. It's, I don't know if you know what the UN decides as a declaration and the countries that sign on for it, it supersedes, the UN law supersedes the laws of the country that signs on with it. As far as land use goes and rights, and this goes specifically about the rights of the Indigenous people. If you know nothing about it, I suggest maybe you look into it because it has some articles in it that are worthwhile looking into it. Where did I write them down here? Like there's articles where it says that, oh God, how am I going to say this if you know nothing about it? The Indigenous people potentially, if this goes through, which the Senate, I think, is going to vote on in April, they could potentially come and say, this is originally our lands and we can claim it, or we can claim it and use it as their lands again, or they can put it tax on it, or they can do basically whatever they want with it. I have a feeling nobody has heard about this. Am I correct?
The acronym is entirely new to me.
Well, apparently, it was supposed to be voted on just before the 2019 elections, the federal ones. But the Senate stalled and didn't get it passed before the elections were called, so it died. But now it's gonna be voted on again. Canada signed on to this plan. They gave royal assent. I'm not quite up to snuff on that, on June 21st, 2021. Now they're working on a bill C-15 with the Indigenous people. The thing in this declaration is that it is very vague. It doesn't say what an Indigenous person is. It doesn't specify it's an Indian, a Métis, or oh, I can never remember the people from up north. They can just take it over. When I sent in this comment on the website, I gave another website for people to look into what it's all about, because Vancouver has signed it into existence. They have all kinds of rules about what the Indigenous people can do. Apparently there are 3, what do you call them, tribes? Whatever, that own the land under Vancouver now. The Northwest Territories apparently have adopted this declaration and they are working on it. BC as a province has adopted this declaration, even though it hasn't passed in Canada through the Senate yet. And they have basically handed over all the crown lands in BC to the Aboriginal people. Aboriginal is proper, right? That's politically correct. Well, don't laugh. I'm
It changes all the
correct.
time. That's fine.
Okay. And there is people that have been renting these crown lands in BC, and all of a sudden they can't do anything anymore because these Indigenous people, that's the proper term, have the right to these lands now. I'm just wondering, apparently there is more municipalities that are doing their plans and they don't know what to do with this UNDRIP program. And I just wondered if you guys have anything in the plan or know about this program or wanted some feedback.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention, especially the acronyms. I can turn to Director Spagnell for any additional comment, and if not, we can just have comment received.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I guess the first thing is we'll have to definitely take back the comments and definitely draft a response to some of the questions that are posed. As part of this process, we're looking at updating the official plan to reflect current in-place provincial policy. So I think my first response would be that because we're dealing with Planning Act policies at the provincial level, and we're talking about something that's trickling down from the federal level, the purpose of this plan is really to deal with the enforced provincial policies that are in place through the Planning Act. There's policies that deal with consultation with Indigenous people, and that would need to go into the official plan. So anything that flows from the federal government down will have to work its way through each individual tier of government before the municipal council will have the ability to discuss any land use planning applications, or any land use considerations under the official plan. I would also ask with Mayor Coughlin's indulgence if our friends from WSP have any comments regarding UNDRIP, and if they have any knowledge of this, they could definitely offer their comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that Mr. Bender has come on screen here.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. And with great respect, I have nothing else to add other than what Director Spagno mentioned. It sounds like this is something that's being discussed through federal legislation, which is outside of the purview of the official plan. Not to suggest that this is not important, something that needs to be on council's radar, but under sort of the jurisdiction of the official plan, it's sort of outside of that.
Thank you. And thank you very much.
From reading about it, though, it suggested that if we don't want this implemented, we have to start from the bottom up. It's like, I don't know what you call it, but a lot of schools and meetings and churches, they start their meetings now with something.
A land acknowledgement.
That's it. And it suggested that if you start doing that, you're basically saying you agree with the land claims of the Indigenous people right there and then.
Thank you for your comments. That's the
Thank you.
politically correct thing to say in this situation. So I do thank you for joining us this evening, and I will turn to Clerk Ainsworth now. And at this point, I can move on to, is there any other members of the public here this evening that would like to make a comment before we do move on to our virtual participants? Seeing none, I will now call upon the moderator to provide the number of people who have registered virtually to ask questions and make comments regarding the public meeting this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. There are 4 members of the public who have registered to make an oral submission for this public meeting. First, I've got John Armstrong of the Masonry Council of Ontario. You may now address council with your questions or comments. I'm just going to promote you here.
Welcome, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with council tonight. As was said, I work with the Masonry Council of Ontario. We're the association that represents the masonry, the brick and block manufacturers, distributors, and contractors. And we work with municipalities all over the province that are doing new official plans and official plan reviews and secondary plans and design guidelines, really to encourage them to put language into their plans that will encourage builders to build to a higher standard. I can tell you that I've been to over 120 municipalities. Mostly when pre-COVID was doing them all in person. So I'm hoping to get back onto the ground a little bit more, because I can tell you the municipalities all over Ontario, you can really have a good sense of that masonry heritage. But in terms of Springwater's official plan and the draft that you have in front of you, there certainly does seem to be some interest in having those higher standards. I mean, our goal is really to get those higher standards in place, because it's not really anybody's responsibility other than municipalities to ensure that the quality of the building stock in the municipality is something that we believe should be beautiful, and B, should last for a very long period of time, and that will really help to create the kind of community that most municipalities want. So within your current official plan, you certainly have a principle that talks about promoting development that will adhere to high quality community design, and to setting an objective of encouraging compatibility through factors like architectural style and details. We also see that in the site plan control section, you talk about encouraging aesthetic design. A couple of comments there. We think that you could strengthen some of that, because, for example, you require, as I said, council for development to adhere to detailed design considerations or the design consideration policies of the plan, but we actually couldn't find that that section in the plan. So we think some of the language is there, but we think some of the language might actually be missing. So you might want to have a look at that again, and make sure if you're looking to have Some say in the in what the quality of the built form is in your municipality. I want to just make sure that that language is in place. The other one is as I said, where you express the intention to use site plan control to encourage aesthetic design. As a result of Bill 23 that's recently been passed, there were changes to that section of the Planning Act where you can actually use site plan control to encourage aesthetic design. So that's actually been removed. But there is opportunity. We believe there's opportunity through your zoning, through zoning bylaw and through section 34 of the Planning Act, where a municipality can set criteria for community character. It's currently been untested in the Ontario Land Tribunal, but we think that's the place through zoning bylaw that you can put you can use if the municipality and if council would like to maintain some semblance of control over the quality of the building stock in Springwater. So we encourage you to put some of that language in the zoning bylaw section that relates to design and or community character. And by doing that, that will provide council with the opportunity, we believe, to have some more control over what's being built in your municipality. Because quite frankly, the kind of decisions you're making, as you know, they're going to be 100-year decisions when these buildings go up, and you're going to want to make sure that they're done properly. And there are lots of great builders out there, but there are some builders who will cut a lot of corners, who won't pay attention to the future. So by putting the language in place in your plan, that just protects you from those builders. So looks like the intention is there. Couple of gaps that we recommend that you have a look at. And then as it relates to using site plan control to encourage aesthetic design, we recommend that you look at the zoning bylaw section and refer to community character. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. I will now move to our moderator for the next question or comment.
Thank you. Trevor Hutton of the town of Wasaga Beach, you may now address council with your questions or comments.
Thank you. Good evening, council. My name is Trevor Houghton. I'm the manager of planning with the town of Wasaga Beach. Thank you for your patience today. I will be brief. I have a request of council for your consideration. It's with respect to a specific policy that's now in your official plan and is proposed to be carried through in the new official plan. It's policy 18.6.2. And this refers to lands that are being developed in town of Wasaga Beach that is abutting your municipality. For the geotechnical, the context of where these lands are, it's the west end of Floss Road 8 West. And specifically, our request is a small one. We ask that there be an addendum to the one sentence in the current official plan policy. Right now it reads, no public access to the golf course is permitted from any street within the township of Springwater. And we would ask that at the end of that, the following be added, except for emergency access purposes. So what we're requesting is a specific exception to that current designation, and with the inclusion of that one sentence. I can advise council that I have spoken and had a pleasant conversation with your director of planning earlier this week. He is aware of it, and we look forward to having a continuation of this discussion with your director and your engineering public works department. Otherwise, that concludes my submissions. I would also ask that we be included in any notice of adoption in the event that council adopts your new official plan. And that I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Houghton, and I do see staff's head nodding. At this time, I will call on our moderator to ask for our third presenter, please.
Thank you. Michael Winia of Skelton Brumwell and Associates, you may now address council with your questions or comments.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Michael Winia and I'm a senior planner and partner with Skelton Brumwell and Associates, a consulting firm, planning, ecology and engineering firm located in Barrie. I'm presenting this evening on behalf of the collective owners of 667, 693. Those are 5 contiguous parcels on Bayfield Street and 668 Bayfield Street North. These parcels are all located adjacent to Barrie, as opposed to being in the Mid-Perst corridor. Also attending this evening is Jake Galvin, representing the owners of 667, 693 Bayfield Street. Our request to council this evening is a relatively straightforward matter. Our request is distinct from the site-specific amendment requests that were referred to earlier by your consultant, as the matters relate to existing designations and zoning. And in our view, our request represents corrections to and achieving clarity in the schedules to the official plan. Basically, we are seeking to have the designation of the subject properties appropriately incorporated into the schedules of the new official plan. And I will address each parcel specifically in that regard. 667 Bayfield Street North. It's one of those 5 contiguous parcels on the east side of Bayfield Street, just north of Barrie. That parcel has frontage on Bayfield Street of approximately 20 meters. And then it has a further block in from the Bayfield Street, approximately 200 meters by 122 meters, that is behind other properties fronting on Bayfield Street. That particular property is currently fully zoned highway commercial in the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The current official plan shows the property designation covering that 20-meter axis and then a narrow strip on the larger block. We believe that's fundamentally just a mapping error, as the designation fully covers the other 4 properties involved, which extend deeper away from Bayfield Street. And again, the zoning of that parcel reflects highway commercial on the entire parcel. So we believe that the approximation of what was to be designated on that parcel should be corrected in the mapping, and that it does not currently reflect the fact that the entire parcel is zoned highway commercial. And that zoning is intended to implement the official plan. So ideally, your official plan matches the zoning. So our current request is that the entire block be designated in a manner consistent with that zoning, and that given the designation of the highway commercial on the entirety of the adjoining lots to a greater depth than on 66 Bayfield, there's no reason for that designation to be limited to just a narrow strip along the frontage of that portion of the lot. That really wouldn't be useful, nor does it reflect the zoning on the property. So fundamentally for that parcel, the designation of the entire lot is more consistent, we believe, with the intent of the official plan and corresponds to the highway commercial zoning of the lands. With regard to parcel 668 Bayfield North, the property at 668 Bayfield North, which is on the west side of Bayfield Street, just north of Barrie, currently has areas which are zoned highway commercial and general commercial. In the proposed official plan, that's not currently reflected, and we are requesting that this zoning again be reflected in the corresponding land use designations in the official plan, so that the designations in the zoning are consistent. Again, the zoning is intended to implement the official plan, so it would be desirable for the official plan designations to reflect the zoning of those lands. In conclusion, in the case of both properties, there are no current development applications, and it's recognized that development of the lands will be subject to further approvals and the provision of proper access and servicing. We've initiated discussions with all of the relevant agencies in this regard. We've talked to the township already. We've talked to Ministry of Transportation, the City of Barrie, and so on. And we're looking towards the future for those lands. And the new official plan represents a vision for the future of your municipality. And we respectfully suggest that the request for the lands to retain their consistency with current zoning and that they be appropriately designated is appropriate relative to that long-term vision. So again, All we're asking fundamentally is that the designations reflect the zoning on the lands and that there's some consistency between the zoning and the official plan, and that we believe that's appropriate in terms of what the intent of the official plan is and your vision going forward in the future. And I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Winia. I am not seeing any questions at this time. I will now call upon Moderator Hawk to introduce our final virtual.
Thank you. I've got Jake Golvin. You may now address council with your questions or comments.
Hi, everyone. I guess this was just a follow-up to Michael, who just presented. The question is just to the study and updating of the land use schedules. So we heard earlier that I think they'd be updated to I guess address any corrections that that need to be addressed. I was wondering if there's an estimate on when those schedules will be published for the public, and if they will be published before the new official plan is like deliberated on by council.
Thank you, Mr. Golvin. I will now turn to Director Spagnell.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. To answer Mr. Golvin's question, the schedules will be provided for review ahead of consideration by council and adoption of anything to do with the official plan. Staff will be working directly with WSP to go over every submission that's been provided. In addition to that, staff will be working with WSP to provide a written response back to the commenters who have submitted their comments and who have submitted their requests with the action that will be taken as it relates to their requests. So this will be provided in advance of a report coming to council that would look at trying to achieve adoption, as Mr. Alexander said, in the next month to 2 months. So the schedules will be available. There will be a response, and commenters who have provided comments and requests will be notified of that item when it is being brought to the floor for council's consideration.
Thank you, Director Spagnell. I will now turn to council for any additional comments or questions. And seeing none, thank you to all who participated in the public meeting with respect to the proposed new Township of Springwater official plan and for showing interest in the matter. May I have a mover and seconder to adjourn the public meeting? Councillors Fisher and Garwood, that this public meeting of the council held under section 17 of the Planning Act for the Township of Springwater official plan now does adjourn at 7:32 p.m. All those in favor? That has carried. And may I have a mover and seconder to refer the new official plan to staff? Councillors Garwood and Alexander, that council having held a public meeting in accordance with section 17 of the Planning Act RSO 1990 P13 as amended on the new official plan for the Township of Springwater, having noted correspondence and input received, direct that the matter be referred to staff to prepare the final version of the official plan for adoption at a later date. Are there any questions or comments from council? And seeing none, all in favor? That has carried. And may I have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw? Councillors Thompson and Deputy Mayor Cabral, that bylaw 030 be to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on March 8th, 2023, listed here and be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? And that has carried. And may I have a mover and seconder to adjourn the meeting? Councillors Fisher and Moore, that the special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 7:34 p.m. to meet again in regular session on March 15th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried.